Hey everybody, January 28th, and today I wanted to discuss the when, why, and how of fertilizing your fig cuttings. For a lot of us, myself included, fig cutting season began back in late November, early December. And some of my fig cuttings I started in late November, and they are pretty advanced right now. And that advanced growth is becoming a problem because it's the end of January and there is still a lot of winter left to grow, and it's not going to be time to plant these in larger containers outdoors or direct in-ground outdoors for quite a while. So we have to determine as gardeners when it's time to fertilize the fig cuttings. The cool thing about fig cuttings is they are self-sustainable to a degree. When you plant the fig cuttings, the inner nutrients inside that cutting itself, it travels and it accelerates its own growth. It's self-sustaining, kind of like an egg. And in normal conditions, that cutting is planted in the ground, it roots and it has the whole earth to feed off of in its typical native climate, which is generally frost-free. So it's very happy. In our world, it is in a container, and a restrictive container. And when it starts running out of its own internal nutrients, you're going to start seeing some yellowing. So that is the when of the fertilization question. You need to start fertilizing when you see yellowing. And if you look specifically at my Col de Dame Noir cuttings, which are these two cuttings right here, these were two of the first cuttings that I started rooting, and they are becoming noticeably yellow in the leaves, especially when you compare it to some of my later cuttings, like these raspberry lattes, or a couple of the Italian 258s way in the back that are hard to see. But you can see how much darker green the cuttings in the back are than the ones up front. And that's because generally the ones up front here are more advanced, and it's time that we fertilize these because they are running out of nutrition. So I want to show you how I'm going to go about doing that. So we just discussed when to fertilize your fig cuttings. You fertilize your fig cuttings when you notice that the leaves are starting to turn yellow. Now we're going to discuss the why. And in this case, it's going to be why I'm choosing the type of fertilizer that I'm choosing. I'm going to use standard Miracle-Gro. This is Miracle-Gro for tomatoes because that's what I happen to have in stock. You can use all-purpose, it doesn't really matter, but I'm going to use Miracle-Gro chemical fertilizer. And there may be some of you watching this video that will be upset to hear that I'm not using an organic fertilizer. And I generally use organic fertilizers, not quite exclusively, but 80–90% of the time, and that's generally the way I like to do things. However, bear in mind, this is an unnatural process that we are doing here. If you live in the United States, figs don't grow here natively. You are not supposed to be rooting figs indoors. This is not their natural habitat. And we're going against nature. We're doing our own thing here, so sometimes the most natural approach is not the best approach. Because we are planting these indoors, these cuttings are susceptible to pests that are not common outdoors. So the reason why we get things like aphids and scale and fungus gnats indoors is because they're in a safe, protected environment where they are sheltered from their natural predators. Outdoors, scale and aphids and fungus gnats, they get eaten alive by larger, more powerful predators. But those predators don't exist inside your house. And I don't want to use an organic fertilizer because, number one, they're generally not readily available, and you need active, living soil to break down that the organic molecules to make them available. We don't have living soil because we don't have a whole thriving ecosystem supported by worms and other things. We have a little bit of potting soil. So organic fertilizers just don't work as good. And the other thing is, I don't want to risk bringing my soil to life too quickly. I don't want to encourage lots of pests to grow and nest inside my soil. I want to use this chemical fertilizer because it is already broken down, it's immediately available for the plants, and it doesn't require a microbiome to break it down for the plants. And I don't want to feed a microbiome inside my house. If these were planted outdoors, by all means go organic, but when you're indoors, try to keep your environment sterile. At least that's what I'm trying to do, and that is why I'm using chemicals and not an organic fertilizer. The final thing is the how. How are we going to fertilize? Well, if I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and you're going to see the instructions that are on this box of Miracle-Gro. You're going to see that the instructions state to mix 1.5 tablespoons of Miracle-Gro within 1.5 gallons of water. So that's a ratio of 1 tablespoon per gallon. We're going to actually cut that in half. We're going to dilute that in half because these are fragile cuttings that have never seen fertilizer before, and we don't want to give them a really big shot of fertilizer. We also don't want to rapidly encourage the microbiome inside those little cups of soil to grow. So we're going to cut that down to a ratio of 1/2 tablespoon per gallon. Now right here, I have 1 quart of water. 1 quart is 1/4 of a gallon, so we are going to use 1/4 of 1/2 tablespoon of fertilizer, or 1/8 of a tablespoon. Now I already did the math for you, and 1/8 of a tablespoon is 0.375 teaspoons. So I have this handy dandy little measuring cup, and I have here a 1/2 teaspoon measuring spoon. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to fill this up most of the way, but not all the way, because our amount is somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2. So I'm going to use this much, not quite half a teaspoon. I'm going to put this in and I'm going to stir it and mix it around until it is fully diluted. And you'll just wait for all of those salt crystals to fully dissolve, and then you're going to bring this inside and you're going to feed the effective plants. If you've watched my videos before, you know that I actually like to water my fig cuttings with a turkey baster because it gives you a great amount of control and precision when you're watering little cuttings in these small pots. And I will make sure to link to that video above if you haven't already seen it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this turkey baster and I'm going to give a few doses of this diluted fertilizer mixture to the affected cuttings. And because this is a chemical fertilizer, you do run the risk of burning the leaves, so I prefer to not get the leaves wet. That's another advantage of the turkey baster method. So I gave all the cuttings about 3 to 4 turkey basters full of the diluted chemical fertilizer mixture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check back in a few days, and I'm going to check on these leaves to make sure that they've greened up a bit. Here we are on February 4th. Since I made the initial video, I've given these 2 more feedings of diluted fertilizer, and you can see it's tough to tell because of the auto white balancing of the camera, but if you compare the leaves of these Col de Dame Noirs versus the other ones now, the difference is not so austere. So before, the raspberry lattes looked a lot greener than the Col de Dames, but now when you compare them, they're a much more similar green. So it looks like the color is starting to come back to the leaves, and they're starting to recover the nitrogen inside of the fertilizer. Seems to be helping. You can see how nice everything looks, nice and green, no wilt. Everything is doing pretty good, and that will give you a nice zoomed in look of the leaves. They were pretty yellow before. I hope you're all enjoying the series that I'm making on figs. I'm having a lot of fun growing these and reporting on them. I hope my videos have been helpful to you all watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel for future updates, and we hope to see you again next time.